Today is October 12th, 2020. And who are we speaking with?
Roy Anthony Morrison.
So, Roy, tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, lived in New York most of my life and been a visual artist, a little bit of writing, and over the last 20 years or so, focusing a lot on photography. Um, really got my start in photography, photographing modern dance, basically, and stretched out into music, arts, a lot of sort of the dance, the underground dance world, as it was called at the time, house music scene. So that's pretty much in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Why don't we get right into it? Why don't you pull up some of your work and then we'll dive in.
Okay, let's see. I've kind of got some stuff from sort of just different years, different parties, so none of it's in any particular order.
That's fine.
Let's see. Let's start here, if you can see that.
Oh, that's a gorgeous photo.
Thank you. That is Anane Vega, of course. The
Can you move the mouse away from her lip?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
Perfect. All good.
Yeah, so that's Anane Vega, well known on the international and local house music scene. As originally came to New York, got into modeling, and from there eventually got into being a singer, performer, DJ, and of course she's married to DJ producer Louis Vega. And I met Anane in the early 90s, around the time when vinyl came into existence after Shelter closed.
And tell people what vinyl is.
Oh, sorry. Vinyl is a nightclub, dance club that was really popular during, again, the 90s period in New York. It came into being after the original Shelter and Hubert Street closed. So after that, it became vinyl, which became the sort of start of Body and Soul. And, you know, again, just continued the New York dance scene. And then it eventually moved to other parties. A lot of other things did. Shelter reopened for a while, then closed. But I knew it, you know, that's where I met Anane, and, you know, we were just friends. You know, that was my tall dance partner. And I had no idea she sang. But this shot is from her Nulu parties, which have been going for a good 10 years or so now. Down at, this was held at Lebain. I can't remember which particular party this was, because she started, again, about 10 years ago, she started the Nulu parties, and she's been hosting them at Lebain for the last several years. But, you know, she's such a beautiful woman. I always attempt to get some shots that really highlight, you know, her beauty and just her distinctive style. So I was pleased about this shot because it was one of the ones from the night I liked. And she was also spinning that night. So, you know, as you've been in club atmospheres shooting, you know how hard it is to sort of get certain moments.
Beautiful.
So that is one. And was there anything you wanted to ask me about that one, or?
No, just I was gonna have just a general question in terms of talk to people about your gear. What are you shooting with? Do you remember your settings? Are you using a flash, straight flash, bounce flash, strobes? You know, tell us about your approach to shooting. How do you approach shooting in a nightclub?
Okay. Wow. Well, you know, here's another one and this shot was taken at Cielo. Cielo's club in New York that hosted Louis Vega's Roots parties, again, for quite a while. My approach to shooting in a nightclub for anybody that's tried to shoot in a low light environment, it's pretty difficult at times. And in a nightclub, it's crazy because you've got lights strobing, flashing, periods of bright light, periods of darkness. So it's all happening at once. How do I approach shooting in a club? And also you've got people, it's just a vortex of chaos in some ways. My own approach to shooting in the club is to capture certain moments, right? Which kind of anybody would say in a way, but I'm looking for certain moments. I'm looking for sometimes certain stories. So in terms of how I approach that, I have to, one, pay attention to the lighting, right? So a lot of times, depending on the effect I want, I have to think in advance in some ways, right? So if I'm using a flash, there's some times that I want to use a flash to get some additional lighting to get the scene, and it's about timing the lights. Again, you've shot in clubs so you'll relate. But again, lights are always flashing, they're strobing, they're going dark, they're going red, they're going blue. I have to light for the scene that I want. So if there's a particular moment or a particular scene that's happening in a certain lighting conditions, I have to light to that, knowing that it's going to be dark again in like 2 minutes, or the lights are going to flood, and I have to keep in mind when I can take that shot, because at a certain point the scene's going to be blown out, or it'll be too dark, depending on how I shoot. So I have to keep that in mind. I have to watch, I have to wait, I have to look at the lights and try to time that. In terms of gear, I'm not really a big gearhead per se. I am when I have the money for stuff. I'm using now a 5D Mark II. I have what I have. I'm using like a 17 to 24, I think. And as a main lens, I don't generally use like a shorter prime lens because I don't have time to change lenses sometimes. And that's about it, a regular strobe flash. And I go, for me, I need to keep it manageable. I need to keep it light. I'm in a club environment, so I don't, there's some things I need to keep with me, but I don't have the time or the luxury to be able to leave stuff places, in the club environment. So I need to travel light and be able to just take the immediate gear that I need. Also, it's a lot easier when you're in the club environment, if you're traveling light, because you have to maneuver through the crowd, you have to maneuver through different places in the venue. It is a club environment, so people are walking around with, sometimes with drinks and that sort of thing, before lockdown anyway.
Well, that
So
was my worst nightmare. Like champagne on the camera. Oh my God,
yeah,
drove me mad. Drove me
exactly,
mad. Yeah.
exactly. So that's the other reason I try to keep it light, manageable. But when I'm not shooting, I also have to be aware of all of that. So I have something, either my hands or whatever, my shirt covering my camera, because you know all these things happen. Somebody bumps into you, or somebody spills a drink, or but outside of that, in terms of gear, that's pretty much what I roll with. And again, my approach is really all about what I want to happen. It's all about lighting, and it's all about what I want to happen. Like the shot that I just had up, um, that was from Cielo, and again, a period where I looked over and I sort of, I saw
Bring it
that.
up again. Bring it up again.
Oh, sorry. Right. So you've been in CLO before, but for those of you that haven't, this area is towards the back of the club. There are bathrooms on the right side, and then there's an entryway out into a little sort of courtyard on the left. but the lighting effect, which is one that normally I hate working with, because, red is, I call it the red light of death, which just, kills all the other tones. But I saw this moment and I saw this silhouette, and, that was something that stuck out at the moment that I wanted to capture. The thing you asked me in terms of settings, I do remember settings. I do remember settings because you have to in that environment. I don't remember these settings. You could easily guess, but you have. For me, I have to remember settings. My aperture and my speed and all that. I have to remember that because taking, say, 3 steps away from this spot, the lighting's different, right? So, I have to readjust, because I'm shooting manual. I have to readjust from where I took this so that I can shoot over in this other spot. Now, if I decide to come back over here, I need these same settings, right? Because it's not going to give me what I just got. So I have to sort of have that in mind in my head, and a lot of times what I'll do is when I, at a certain point, when I sort of have my settings for the night down, I make sure that I keep that in mind. And then I can move around the venue and shoot the way I want. But I have to, generally I end up having to readjust almost at every step, because again, I shoot with a lot of attention to the available light, but it's also about balancing my strobe to the available light as well.
I love it.
And that's important. I should say also that when I started out, sort of shooting, in the house music environment, it wasn't about shooting in the club, mostly because I was just too busy dancing and having a good time at the party. So I didn't really do it that much, and I never thought I was really all that great at it, which is why I left it to a lot of other people to do, like yourself. you know. I started shooting more really, actually when Anane asked me to cover her Nulu parties. And I mean, I had done it here and there, but just totally for my own artistic purposes. So it really wasn't about, per se, a particular performer, even though I liked shooting performance, which is the thing, instead of sort of shooting dances in the club, that was more my thing, But I made that point to say that one of the ways I started paying more attention to the club environment, or one of the reasons, was listening was looking at images from club parties and all that, and also listening to what people said about it, and then becoming more aware of the guys that work the lights, right? Louis' parties, Ariel worked the lights. I don't know if you knew. I'm sure you must have known
Yeah,
Ariel.
yeah, yeah, Mario.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and Louis, after doing Anane's parties, Louis would ask me to come down and shoot parties at times, even though I would just do it again. I would just bring my camera sometimes to shoot parties, but I didn't post them. I didn't post them much and didn't really put them out there. But after being at Cielo's a couple of times, I remember hearing Louis talking to Ariel and telling him, I really liked the way the club looked last night. The club looked really beautiful. So, thinking about that more and more, and what that meant in terms of different viewpoints, right? Because I'm shooting dances, I'm shooting like that happening that's going on in the club. But then I started thinking more about what Louis was saying, because it's also about different vantage points. People see different things in the club, right? If you're shooting, you're aware of a certain perspective. If you're dancing, then you've got a certain perspective there. And then I started thinking about what Louis was seeing from the booth, because that particular window is not one that I have, because I'm not standing in that spot. You can be in the booth at times at different places, but from where he was, I started thinking about what he was seeing. And in terms of of reflecting or showing the venue as well as the parties. You know, there are different aspects, right? You can, you know, you can key in on the dancers and what's happening on the dance floor, or you can sort of highlight the venue and what's happening there, or cover them both, right? But to do that, you then really have to be aware of the lighting, the environment, the you know, the different lighting effects that are happening, because the lighting is affecting different parts of the venue, right? It's showing you different parts of the club in different ways. And here's one from Cielo, right?
Beautiful.
Now, the thing about it, right, is in terms of what I'm talking about, is being able to show all these elements, right? Uh, Being able to get the smoke that's coming out, you know, that's coming from the smoke machine, the people as they're lighted by the club light, right? And even, you know, the different lighting effects, but it's also showing you different venues, right? The different parts of the venues that are lighted differently, all of that, you know. So in a way, if you're not paying attention to that, you capture in a sense the same thing, but it doesn't give you certain elements, right? It doesn't give you certain flavors. At a certain point, you can either have, you know, things hidden because of the amount of light that you're seeing in the background, which is not necessarily a negative thing. It just doesn't show you that, right? Or you can balance it so that everything, you know, the spectrum of light leans more towards white, and then you don't see those different colors that come from where those different lights are hitting the venue.
Beautiful.
So yeah, so in terms of gear and all that, I really keep it, you know, try to keep it really light and functional. And for me, settings, it's, you know, settings, you know, I do have to keep those in mind. It really is all about the lighting, because, you know, it's going to be dark in a 1 second, you know, and you
Gotcha.
might have to wait for your moment, right? Because I may have, you know, that the shot I just showed, I may have to wait for that, because because my settings are primed for that, and that's the shot I'm waiting for, right? So, you know, the aerial may have taken us through, you know, 7 different lighting effects before he gets back to that. But if that's what I want, I have to wait.
Beautiful
And
shot.
thank you, really appreciate that. I'll show you something else,
Wow.
right?
I
So,
love it.
well, thank you. This is also a CLO shot, right? And again, it's moments. You know, you ask, like, what am I, you know, what I'm focusing on. I decide, sometimes I decide what parts of the party I want to cover, and sometimes I decide what story I'm telling, right? So I saw this in terms of lighting, right? I saw this, and of course it's you know, it's optimal to work with. But again, I had to wait for this lighting to come back, right? But it's also being conscious enough to balance the light so that I can depict as close to what I'm seeing, pretty much, right? Because in that moment, and I don't know how long, you know, I forget how long this lasts. Sometimes it's 2 seconds, or it might be like maybe even 30 seconds, right? Um, but being able to capture my field of vision from what I can see, you know, of the people, you know, and also you're shooting through the smoke machine, you know, through the smoke. So you have to allow that for that too. And that makes it infinitely, well, it makes it a lot more difficult, you know, especially if you're using a flash, because your flash is going to bounce off some of the smoke. But you also, you know, have to, you know, I have to again set my camera so that I can get as much of what's happening through all of that.
I love it. Take a look at another one.
Oh, sure. Let's see. We've got, oh, uh,
Wow.
there's a lot of Cielo moments here.
Do you
But
remember what party this is?
do I remember what party this is? Yeah, it is. It was actually, it was one of the last parties at Cielo before they closed sometime last year.
Mm-hmm.
I, I, I think it might have even been a Nulu party.
Mm.
This is this is maybe like 3 o'clock in the morning, right? So it's about an hour before they close,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Um, and it was, it was just, it was just a great moment, because the people on the floor were just just playing and just having a really good time, but again, it was all these elements that came into play at once, you know, balancing the light, waiting for these moments, waiting for, a lot of what I like to capture too is a certain sort of dialogue between people with movement, with dance, with their emotions, and just like the way so many things are happening at once, just with the guy in the background, just, into his own thing, into his own world, and this couple just playing, and just having a good time.
Mm.
And let's see, I have actually from the same party, right? That's Tony C.
Mm.
If you've heard the Louis Vega, she did a track with Louis Vega, "Time Don't Wait."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She's an incredible songwriter and musician. Worked with a whole lot of rock musicians and all that. And she's just she comes to all of Louis' parties, and she's just like an incredible spirit in the in the music. And this was again like early, that same party, like early in the morning, where we're all just having a good time. But it's capturing, it's capturing those moments. Like I said, I call them bright moments. Um, it's just, and I'm waiting for a lot of these type of moments. They only last a second.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge is being aware, watching, again, waiting, waiting for that magical thing, whatever it might be. Here's another one that is again Cielo. It's Louis' birthday, so
Yeah.
another bright moment.
Love it.
And again, it's and actually that's Louis' mother in the background in the red.
Yes, and Doris in the front. I love it.
Yes, yes, and again, you since and I keep saying, but for anybody that's been in the club, you can appreciate that there's a million people in that booth or trying to get in
Yeah.
or being around, and these things are sort of impromptu. So Doris comes up with the cake right in between the sets or whenever she's able to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but I've just left the dance floor, right? A whole different kind of lighting over there, right?
Yeah.
And now I've come to the booth. So again, it's readjusting, right, for what's there. And if I have to go back out into the booth, it's a different light.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for me, it's all about being in tune and capturing those moments, right? And they're every, there's so much happening throughout the night. There are like literally 8 million stories in there, and they're all happening at once, right? This
Just.
is Jasper Street and Company.
Mm.
I love this shot because after years of shooting in club environments, I'm starting to really love to get comfortable balancing light, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So I love this shot because of the energy, but because of the colors at the time, and the just this woman in the front who was just feeling it, and she had a coat and she was just like throwing it all over the place. But to be able to, again, to capture all this energy, all of this stuff's happening at once. And the other reason I love it is because, that sort of flowing fabric thing is something I like. I mean, I've shot fashion for the last 10 years. And that's always like, something I like because it conveys a sense of energy. And I just find it beautiful to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this shot is from, again, one of last year, before lockdown. This is like maybe the last one of the last parties I did before lockdown, and just a fun shot. Anane, after spinning, she'll spin and then she'll come into the crowd. She'll come onto the dance floor and get her dance on and just have a good time. And of course, Tony C is just always dressing up in some kind of outfit that's just amazing. The energy and everything was so cool in this shot. It was, and again, it's just one of those moments that happens like that.
Mm-hmm. I love that shot. It's beautiful.
Thanks. And it's as I said, it's sort of it's one that I really like. I showed you this one earlier before we had started. So
Wow. Kings of House.
yes, and this is from the first Kings of House party that was held at Webster Hall. I believe was in 2011.
Wow.
And again, tons of people there. Even though the booth area, music area where they were at was sort of spacious because it was on the stage, but not the easiest to maneuver around, and get to. And there were people everywhere and all that. But again, it was a moment that I saw developing. As soon as I noticed them, that the three of them had, I forget who was up there first, but as soon as I realized the three of them were up there together, I said, man, I gotta get a shot. But I couldn't get close enough, from the front, from a full front view, for whatever reason. So I came up towards this. I came up from this angle, which I like anyway. I also prefer sort of odd, non-standard angles, um, because it gives me a chance to get something different,
Mm-hmm.
than every other person there with a camera. It
Mm-hmm.
also helps me learn stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw them, I saw these guys as soon as they were all three together. I sort of just waited for a moment. I didn't have necessarily one planned. I just knew that I would know it when I saw it. And, it was right here this time, because they were sort of all in their own individual thing. Like when you see these guys spinning, when they're deep into their thing, that's what they look like. They all have their individual expression and an individual moment of when they're, really working on their craft. And just to see them all together, I thought was really cool. And this isn't actually a photo I've even put out as much, you know. I think I've posted it a couple of times, but not that much.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and here's one that I also like.
Mm-hmm.
And this again is Cielo, right? Guest DJ Joseph Capriati.
Mm-hmm.
Really incredible DJ from Europe, and just incredible energy, And the crowd comes out for him. But this again was a challenge, and I did a couple of these. This was one of the ones that came out great, but this was a challenge because from the vantage point, this, you either there are two extremes you get when you're in the club shooting. You know, you either get very little light, it's almost dark, you know, or it's really, really bright at times, right? So this was again another moment where I had to, uh, you know, balance and set things so that I could sort of capture that energy that all these people were feeling, but at the same time keep where, you know, keep the vantage point from where I was, and you know, get the effects of the lighting that was, that the lighting that was happening at my vantage point, or the spot where I was standing. And it's not, you know, again, I took a couple of these things, not all of them came out the way I wanted to, but that's, you know, it's a matter of adjusting. And that's why you have to pay close attention. And you can, you know, you can also tell by the work you're putting in uh, to getting the various shots that you want, what your potential for growth is, in a sense. You
Mm.
know, about how much work you're willing to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, um, but you know, these were just for me. I love this kind of thing because, you know, you don't, when you're in the crowd and enjoying the party, you don't necessarily see this. And this is the kind of vantage point that the DJ is looking at. This is where he or she is getting their energy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, but there is, here, here's another, here's a moment from Miami Winter Music Conference. And this was, I believe, 2014. This was at the Nulu party in Miami. And it's a Nulu South Africa party, which was really awesome. We had a really large contingent of folks over from South Africa. And again, this is just like this great moment where I didn't, you know, I didn't know that she was going to do that. I didn't know she had a flag or anything, but I just happened to see her pulling it up, and
Mm.
I had to capture that. So it was a really, really cool night, actually. One of the there was a couple there from South Africa, and the guy actually proposed to his fiance at that party.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a
That
really,
was a great
really cool
shot.
night. And oh, here's, I'll show you one of my favorites. There's also a Nulu party.
Mm.
Um, I might have been, I can't remember what the occasion was, but it's one of my favorite images because these girls were, you know, they were just, they were so into their own, you know, vibe of dancing, and they, you know, they were using the couch, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it also reminds me of one of these sort of Hindu-esque statues, because you don't, you know, all you see these four legs, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you don't completely see the other person. So it's just a fun, for me, just a fun moment, wacky image. And again, this is, you know, this is the type of thing that I look out for, you know, because there is so much happening, but there, you know, wherever you are in a party or in a club environment, there are just these different stories happening. You know, you can watch a whole sort of dance opera in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now we talk about lighting.
Mm.
Right? This is this is something that took me a long time to be able to do. You know, I mean, maybe, you know, for other people who you know, focus more on this side sort of thing, you know, maybe it comes easier. But this took me a long time to sort of, you know, get to, in a way, because when you're, it's one thing when you're focusing on people, but again, this is one of those times where you don't have that much lighting per se. You know, you have this the ambient lighting is down, but you have these specific lighting effects, and this is Cielo, and this is the kind of thing that Ariel will do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But but again, to be able to balance, you know, to balance your flash, and I believe I did use flash with this shot, But to balance all that, so you can pick up the individual stories of what's happening with the light, you know, and have it be a pretty much as true a reflection as you can get, because there are even times when, you know, digital or film might do something a little different with the light spectrum. But, you know, if you think about, you know, the beams of the light that are crossing into other colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the beam of green that crosses over into the reddish orange lighting,
Mm-hmm.
or and then that same light is falling down on some of the people on the dance floor, just enough for you to see them, which is, you know, which is what you would see when you're standing there. But try to reproduce that, you know, with, you know, with your camera, regardless of whatever you're using, whether it's cell phone or whatever. You know, there are going to be some places where you're gonna lose that. Basically, you're going to lose some things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, you know, and I've been shooting, you know, over the last 10 years or so, a hell of a lot more inside the club venue than, you know, than I did in the past. So for me, a lot of it's, you know, it's an evolution in a lot of respects, which I showed you that before. So um, here's another one. Now, this is this is again from the, as you can probably see, from the same party, but what you're dealing with also with this is what happens when you change colors, right?
Mm.
And what happens to the spectrum of light, even using when you've got fog going on, and, you know, again, you've got people. There are, you know, the bluest shades, you know, the coolest shades of light are my favorites to work with, you know, as opposed to the warmer colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can see again what happens just in the upper left. You've got this blue area of fog, but you've also, because of the white light, that the white yellow light that's shining through it, you've still got an area that's kind of white,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, you know, imagine wanting to capture all that,
Mm.
right? Now, there are also elements you don't necessarily, I don't necessarily know in advance, like everything per se, every sort of color spectrum I'm going to capture,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I have a general idea what's going to happen, right? Or how I need to set my adjust my settings to deal with that color.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So with the bluer light, it allows me to get a little bit more detail of what's happening with the crowd, right? So you'll see a little bit more of that. It also makes it easier to get that white highlight of the guy right in the center
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that you can see. Again, that's what I'm seeing there. Like if I was standing at that spot. Now, if that light were shifted more warmer to the red, it would be a lot more difficult to get that particular detail.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what I have to keep in mind moment to moment while I'm there, right? So I say, okay, well, all right, well, maybe I'm not going to get that, or I have to wait for that to come around. Um, here is here's another shot that I like.
Mm.
Right, this is the same South Africa Nulu party.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at the moment that Anane and Louis walked through the door, basically,
Mm.
and I like this shot because it's, you know, it's such a sort of natural, casual shot. They both look fantastic, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the warmth, and, you know, the emotion and all that. And that's another thing that, um, regardless of whether I'm shooting in a club atmosphere or not, that's always something that I key in on. You know, I want to get a certain expression. I want to get to capture something of the essence of the person. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, maybe in a positive way, how you used to hear that in the early days of photography, people thought that, you know, if you took that picture, you were capturing a piece of their soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, well, in a more positive way, that's what I'm trying to do. You know, which is why, you know, my tag is photo soul. You know,
Mm.
I'm looking to get the essence, to get at the essence of the subject matter, even if it's something inanimate. You know,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a party, whether it's an event, but there's something essential that I'm trying to capture because I want to distinguish myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm doing, what everybody else is doing, then what the hell do they need me for? You
Mm-hmm.
but it's also a carryover from my days as a painter, you know, because when I like depicting people and emotions, so that's actually what you're doing, part of what you're doing when you create a painting. You're trying to capture the essence of something.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from Louis Vega's expansions parties that came into being after Cielo's closed. I think this might have been the second party
Mm-hmm.
with Josh Milan as guest DJ.
Mm-hmm.
This was an incredible party because he was using it to one of the things he did was sort of test some new music he was working on.
Mm-hmm.
But he was just that whole night was just great, and there was this one moment where he was just really in the spirit, so in the house music spirit and the vibe. And again, I was keeping a look, looking at everything, keeping track of everything, and I saw this moment happening, and I was like, yeah, I have to have that moment.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you. Um, he likes this one as well. It's one of his favorites. Um, showed you that. Let me see. I've got some a couple that are more recent. Um,
Mm.
this was uh, Halloween party, actually. Well, yeah, more recent, last year before lockdown. So this
Mm.
was the Nulu Movement Halloween party that was held at Lebain.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I really appreciate about Anane, being a former being a former model, she's got this incredible fashion sense,
Mm.
and she's always glam when she comes to her parties. More so with Halloween, which gave everyone a chance to dress up a bit. I didn't think of it at the time, but I should have got you a picture of Christian Mantini and his getup as well.
Mm.
Um, Once again, a bright moment. Ted Patterson was one of the guest DJs that night as well.
Mm.
And he was just phenomenal, just phenomenal. But again, there are all these bright moments that happen throughout the night, these special moments for me,
Mm-hmm.
just fun moments, just the genuine, honest, playful interactions that happen, the happiness just from being on the scene, and this was again when I had, anytime once Anane steps out from the booth, then I'm definitely on alert because I know there's going to be some great stuff happening,
Mm.
and this again is classic in terms of what I have to keep in mind, because the other thing is that, and again, as even though this image, it's one of my favorites, it looks great, but when I look through the lens, I can't see anything. you
Mm-hmm.
know
Mm-hmm.
and what I do see is a flash for a moment, but again, I have to adjust to my conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you know as you can see, there's smoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's smoke. The lights were strobing. There's a free complete piece of plexiglass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know there's everything else going on. So there are a couple of ways I could still have gotten a good shot that I like, but here's the thing that I have to account for, right? Depending on what I want. And I wanted everything you see in here is what I wanted. But mostly, for me, the other added excitement was her reflection in the plexiglass,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in the, I don't know, three 3 to 4 seconds, right? That this moment lasts. Yeah, maybe 6 seconds, right? That this moment lasts. I have to adjust so that the flash I'm using doesn't bounce off the plexiglass, right? And obscure her reflection, partly obscure him, or you know, or whites him out, or
Mm-hmm.
overexposes him, right? Or it doesn't bounce back too much on her, doesn't reflect it off the smoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, isn't too dark or too light.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this wasn't the only one I shot. I took about 2 or 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in all of that, the other thing, going back to what you asked me about how I work, you constantly have to pay attention to what you're doing.
Mm.
You have to pay attention to what you're doing. You have to know what you want. So again, if that shot's not didn't it was overexposed or it was underexposed, it was too hot, whatever, I have to keep in mind what I want and adjust so that I get it, hopefully while before that moment's passed,
Mm.
right? So you always, and more so necessarily than remembering a particular setting, I really focus on remembering a range, right? Because I'm going to have to adjust, you know, in between that range. Now, this is just for me, right? And the
Mm.
way I work, and a lot of the way I work is influenced by my former, my other work as a painter, right? And so I'm really keyed in terms of what I want regarding light and color, because in the past, that's something I would have to literally create on a flat surface with
Mm.
brush and paint or pencil. So I say that to say that other people may work differently. They get good shots and shots that they like based on not thinking about any of that stuff. Just they adjust their flash and they're good to go, and that's fine. For what they do, and
Mm.
if that's what they want. I myself, I find it curious, for someone to, especially be in a nightclub, again, it depends on what you want, though. It's not so much a judgment, it's just a look at how people work, right? But if you're not shooting with your camera on automatic, then I would imagine that everything you shoot is going to look the same if you never make an adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know, and I know what happens when I change my location, which is the other thing about shooting in a club, is that a lot of folks don't realize that I'm not there, that I'm there for another purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, they want me to, so when they, tap me on the shoulder and want me to take their picture, it's not necessarily that that I don't like to do that sort of thing. I might be in the middle of a shot, or I might need a moment, because when I have to turn towards you, that's a whole different lighting situation, right?
How
And
do you manage that? I found that challenging at times if I'm focusing on a specific shot and somebody wants a god awful couple shot. How do you navigate that? Because that shot is going to be straight trash, but then you kind of have to take it to sort of keep the peace, but then you also know that you're not going to post it. How do you navigate that space?
yeah, that's difficult for me. I try to be as nice about it as I can. What I usually try to do is get I usually try to get them to let me take a picture of them with their cell phone. Um,
Oh, that's gangster. I love it.
the thing is, the, the thing is, it gets difficult because one, it's not so much that I'm averse to that sort of thing. When two people in a club ask you to take their picture and then send it to them, you
Yeah,
know, it's not so bad. But at the end of the night, now there are 50 people, right?
that's the issue.
Like, should I quit my job?
And
Um,
that was my issue too. Like I don't mind one or two, but then once one couple sees you doing it, everybody starts asking you to do the same thing. That's
right.
my issue. Yeah.
Well, basically what I do is, very politely, very nicely explain, one, that I don't send pictures to people,
Hmm.
you know, and two, that, if I'm shooting, say I'm covering a Lulu party, right?
Mm-hmm.
Simply let them know that, if I or if I do take their pictures, because sometimes, it's just easier to snap a picture. But what I'll do is I'll let them know that I'm shooting for the party, right? So all the pictures are going to go there, and they'll be posted on the site if their picture is one of the ones chosen.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that happens to me a lot is that people want me to take that picture and then email it to them.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have time.
Right. Right.
People don't really understand that you're doing, as a photographer, you're doing a whole bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at the party shooting, but I'm at the party shooting, but I have work at home that I have to do when I go back home. Not to mention all the shots from the party. Um, but but that's one of the ways I look at how I do. I try to work with people as much as possible and letting them know why I'm there and what I'm doing. But at this point, it's really is about just me letting them know I don't do that. Or I'll say, if you're here at the party having a good time, I'll get your shit. I'll photograph you. It doesn't always work. I had someone again. There was a time when I was at a photo shooting a Nulu party, and I happened to be having an issue with my camera, which sometimes comes
Yep.
up for whatever reason, right?
Yep.
Just then, someone tapped me on the shoulder, wanted me to take a picture of them and their girlfriend, and I said, uh, and I was right in the middle of trying to put the lens back on. I just turned. I said, not right now. If you can just let me do this. And of course, they didn't like that. I saw I dealt with my camera and I went back over to the person to try to explain to them that I was having a problem with the camera at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I go over to them and I say, excuse me, I just want you to understand that right at that moment. And before I could finish, she's like, no, 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 I see who you are. I see who you are. And just walked off, In that regard, there's just nothing you can really do.
Did we
Uh,
go through all the images?
oh, did we? I believe we did. Hang on a second. Oh, that's from the Paradise Garage reunion a couple years ago,
Mm.
or some years ago, maybe about 7 or so.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just just wanted to get that energy, of what I'm missing now that we're in lockdown, which is just a full dance floor, people having a great time.
Mm-hmm.
It seems so alien to look at now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, some of the same types of considerations, trying to get a trying to get a sense of the energy and just the moment in terms of this is what it looked like, which is one of the reasons I started doing, more photography in the club. I missed my chance to do that during the garage era. I'd actually wanted to do a documentary during the closing days of the garage,
Mm.
which I kind of started, but back then, equipment was bigger and clunkier.
Mm.
So I never really got to sort of finish it, as it were. I just did a couple of interviews with people.
Mm-hmm.
And during the shelter era, I started shooting more because I knew it was going to be something, again, it was sort of my second chance in a way, because I missed documenting the garage. And I knew this was going to be something, that era was going to be just as important.
Mm-hmm.
And I started basically by shooting people after they came out of the club, because people would change and they all looked good after 12 hours of partying. So that's kind of what started the road to me doing more of the house club photography, and then just shooting performances, getting to know some of the people involved in the scene more. But that's what kind of led, and then I got into fashion at some point, and some other aspects of entertainment photography. But on that end, in terms of just getting more into documenting this whole culture, and there were more elements to it, of course, during the 90s, I think, in terms of just visually.
What's that monk photo?
Uh,
Second row, far right.
oh, that one is kind of small.
Okay.
I didn't know if it would show up so good.
Yeah, it's too small. That's all right. We'll get out of that one.
Yeah, but it was I thought I had some other I thought I loaded some other pictures
Yeah. Have we
of
covered everything at this point, I think? I
yeah,
think we
we've gone through all the photos. There were a couple that didn't translate so good that we didn't see, but
Yeah, we got
yeah, let me
cool. So
see.
then why don't you get out of the screen sharing thing and then we could just have a regular convo.
Okay, sure. Uh, okay, stop the share. Stop share. All right, there we go.
Fantastic. So
Okay.
let's start at the beginning. What is house music?
What is house music? Just told somebody the other day that house music is a feeling. House music is what Mel Sharon called danceable R&B. It's what I call anything that makes your body want to move to it. You know, soulful house, which involves really pertinent lyrics.
That's my
Uh,
next question. What is soulful house? And how is that different from house music?
well, I make that distinction. Well, soulful, deep house, there are all these different subgenres, I think, that came along as a result, to me anyway. I'm not saying that I'm an expert, but having to do with like, you know, techno and all these other sort of aspects of electronic music. So for me, soulful house, deep house is really about um, that soulful R&B type expression that speaks to emotion, especially with lyrics. You know, for me, that's a big part of it. You know, the substance of song lyrics that that touch what you're feeling, touch what you're going through. You know, both in negatives and positives. Just a full spectrum of what life is about.
How does house music make you feel?
Wow, how does house music make me feel? It makes me feel happy. You know, it makes me feel all kinds of ways. You know, it makes me feel happy. It makes me feel sad. It speaks to where what I want to feel, what I am feeling, what I have thought. You know, and that's not. And again, that's well. And you asked about how does house music differ from soulful house, right? So house music, and I was having a conversation with someone about this. House music is Mick Jagger's "Lucky in Love." You know,
Mm,
right? Uh, soulful house music is Monique Bingham, "Won't Stop."
mm,
Right? House music is Nirvana, "Smells Like Teen Spirit." You know,
mm-hmm.
right? Soulful house music again. You know, it's different genres, so it comes into the to the aspect of how the music affects you, right? How it makes you feel. You know, um, it's 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 the fact that it makes you feel. You know,
Mm.
it's
What
the
is the
fact.
Paradise Garage?
What is the Paradise Garage? Paradise Garage, well, was the home temple, you know, of so many people who are involved in what's called house music now. It was a gay club that eventually featured both a night for predominantly straight people and a night for predominantly gay people. You know, it was the place where music was created, music was enjoyed, played, tweaked. They were open from about 1976 to 1987. Um,
And how
and
did you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
and you know, just a lot of performers. It was a membership club. You know, you had to be a member or the guest of a member to be admitted, right? And so many of the artists, DJs that we enjoyed now in the genre came out of there. A lot of, you know, we got to see a lot of major artists there. I saw Madonna there for the first time, you know.
What was
bef-
that like?
oh, well, that's a story. Madonna, this was a time when I think she had just had her first record. It was Everybody,
Mm-hmm.
I think, right?
I remember that. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then, you know, so we see on the bill, you know, Madonna, you know, but we didn't really, we knew the song and you know, Larry played, we knew the song, but we didn't really know her, you know.
Mm.
So they introduce her. We're all, whole house is full in front of the stage. Madonna, she comes out on the stage, and it's crickets. She stands on the stage looking at us. We're on the floor looking at her, right? She leans into the mic and goes, "What's the matter with you people? Didn't you take enough drugs tonight?" And the whole place just explodes in claps and cheers. Then she starts singing.
Wow.
And after that, the rest, as they say, was history in terms of she was there a lot just to hang out, as were other celebrities. I mean, Boy George was there regularly.
Wow.
Boy George was there regularly. Came in, one of the first times I saw him hanging out there, he came in dressed as the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. Right? Him and his entourage just walked in, partying, hanging out on the floor. There were nights when he would be there. Patti LaBelle would be there. All these other, I mean, and people, I remember this one night where, where I was on the floor and his friends tapping me. She says, "Look, that's Patti LaBelle over there." I looked around, looked over, sure enough, Patty's there, having a good time, dancing her ass off. But, nobody, everybody just partied. Nobody geeked out and ran up to, "Oh my God," and gave the autograph or anything. Because part of the thing, if you were at the garage, you were also a star. You were a dancer, So you didn't, I mean, you noted these people. It was great to see them hanging out there, but it wasn't that sort of, "Oh my God," type thing, or it wasn't like a Studio 54 thing. They came there to chill out, So there's a host of celebrities that you saw.
Describe the Grace Jones performance.
Okay. Well, which one?
Oh, tell us about all of them.
Well, I'll tell you about the ones that stand out most in my mind. There was the one where, again, the first time I saw her perform at the garage, right? So there was, because the performance she did before there was an incident with some guy handcuffing himself to her, Yeah, some dude handcuffed himself to her, and she didn't take kindly to it. So he caught a few blows from Grace, right? And so I didn't see that performance, but when she came back another time, right? They start off by showing her video. I think there's a video she had where she was in a gorilla suit. And so they're showing the video, right? And it gets to the end of the video, there's a place where she takes off the mask, and you see it's Grace Jones, right? So when they get to the end of this video, the curtain comes up, right? And you see someone in a gorilla suit, right? And she pulls off the head, and it's Grace Jones, right? Of course, the whole crowd is going nuts, right? She takes the mic, and she says, "You better not fuck with me or else I'll kick your fucking ass." So, and of course, the show was just amazing after that. Now, the Slave to the Rhythm show, now that sticks out in my mind. Well, there was one where she performed at the shelter too, but this was after the garage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or during that same period. So she does the Slave to the Rhythm show, and I can't remember where it was. It wasn't at the Paradise Garage. It was no, yes, it was. Of course, it was at the garage.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to wait, of course, you had to wait for whatever, a while before she's coming out. And everybody's like hyped, right? They're playing, they go through playing Slave to the Rhythm. Oh, before that, all we saw was the stage, which had been painted to mimic the way Steve Harring had painted her, right? And my mind's blanking out whether this was actually I believe it was right after the garage, but all we saw was the stage area, and it was dark, right? They're playing Slave to the Rhythm, and we know she's going to be singing the song. So we're standing there thinking, why are they playing this now when she's going to come out and sing it? She's going to come out and sing it, and everybody's impatient. They're like, "Great, it's great." The whole time we're hearing Slave to the Rhythm, right? And then at some point, something on stage moves. Grace was up there the whole time singing, but because she was painted and the stage was blacked out, we couldn't see her. She was actually invisible. But of course,
Wow.
everyone was just done. They was just like,
They must have lost their minds.
I mean, completely. It was the most, I had never seen anything like that. I mean, really, it was just so shocking because we were looking right at the stage and couldn't
Yeah.
tell the woman was on stage, you know?
Wow.
And that was just amazing. The other one was the show she did during the shelter era, which I took pictures of
Mm.
and which no one's seen. You know, I should have included one of those too, unfortunately, but I didn't. But that show is I had to spend six, and this was before digital, right? So I had my camera, my Minolta, I think at the time,
Hmm.
waiting 6 hours in that one spot at shelter for her to come on.
Mm.
But of course, the show was unbelievable, you know. Um, so that's what I remember of Grace.
Describe a typical night at the garage in terms of walking into the club, the line outside, the ramp. Like, describe that experience for someone that's never experienced that. Like, talk to
Wow.
us about like getting off the subway. Where would you get off the subway? Just walk us through.
Well, well, for me, because I came down from the Bronx, right? So I would eventually, I take number two down, switch at 14th Street to the number one, get off at Houston. Yeah,
Mhm.
right. Get off at Houston.
Mhm.
You were right at the corner of the garage, right? So as soon as you came up the stairs, the first thing you would see were there'd be guys, you know, selling various, uh, drugs, as it were. You know, whether it was weed, mescaline, whatever. You know, you walk down the King Street, and you'd see the line. The line a lot of times would start right at the corner of King Street, right,
Mhm.
to get into the garage. You'd walk down, you know, eventually you'd get down to the door. And that was the thing because the whole time you're online, you know, you're waiting, all this anticipation, you know, people are, you know, they're saying hi to friends, they're, you know, they're talking, they're, you know, you know, up, I remember being online once, you know, it's a long line, you know, it's taking a while to get through, you know, and then you hear somebody up ahead go, uh, whoever's feeling my buns, I hope you're getting enough of them. So you get down to the door, right? So there's Noel is there, you know, Noel who worked the door, the famous, you know, Marlboro man. Just a superb human being and the most elegant person handling the door I've ever seen. He gave the best refusals, you know. Uh,
Really?
oh yeah, you know, if for whatever reason, if you didn't look, you know, he would just lean over and says, you know, I don't really, this isn't really for you, you know. And the person would like nod and they would leave, you know. So no, this isn't really your thing. This isn't for you, you know, because some people had, you know, they were a little put off sometimes, you know, knowing it was a gay club or finding out it was a gay club. So you
Mm.
get to the door, right? And this is, you know, after all of that, you get to the door, you go inside, and you're inside an actual garage, right? Which is, you know, which is great. So you go in, you know, you go through that, you step through the door. You still with me?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
Okay.
here. Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry. I'm leaning back. I'm here. Yeah.
yeah. So you go through that, and then you get to the ramp, right? Because you go through a little check, you know, security check thing. Then you get to the ramp, but by the time you're getting there, you can feel the bass of the music, you know, and it's just this long ramp up to the front there, and where the entrance is, you see this big neon Paradise Garage sign, and like your excitement, you know, your intensity is building the whole time you're hearing the music, you know, music that you're not hearing on the radio most of the time, you know, and you're seeing people there, you know, how they're dressed, everybody's got their like personality, their, you know, own individual style sense. It's just, it was just amazing. You were so hyped by the time you stepped up inside that club, you know.
Wow. Wow. Um, what other performances of the garage stood out for you?
Wow, a lot. Carolyn Harding is one. You know, her big track Memories, which
Mm.
was just amazing. You know, um, just such a big track, just amazing. And as a performer, she was unbelievable. You know, George Krantz, Din Dada, that was another performance that stood out for me. Uh, partly because we had to wait there. We had to wait so long for him to get into town. He was scheduled, you know, the usual sort of somewhere around midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. No, not midnight, but somewhere around like 2, 3 in the morning. There was a problem at the airport and his plane was delayed, you know. So we all had to wait like hours for him to finally get there. But, you know, he performed live. You know, he had his whole crazy drum set, you know, how many drums he had laid out, but it was just unbelievable, you know. But that's one of the performances. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on so many names right now. But there were just, you know, it was great to see people performing, you know, doing their thing live, you know.
Describe.
Liz
Sorry.
Torres as well,
Ooh,
unbelievable.
what was that like?
Oh, it was crazy. I mean, that woman just had, you know, just had the audience, especially guys, just trying to climb up, just wanting to climb up on stage, you know. I mean, just incredibly powerful, sexy woman, and this just the music alone was so powerful at that time, you know. So the stage performance was just excitement. People carried on. They really worked their ass off on that stage.
Mm, mm. Describe the fashion. What did people wear to the club at that time, and how is it different from today?
Oh wow, it's light years away from today. That's kind of one of the sad things, is that it's back then people, you know, people really put a lot of work into how they express their personal style, right? Because you still had, again, all these fashion movements that were going on at the time, punk, you know, punk rock influences, all that kind of stuff. So there was a great, uh, there was a great sort of combination, right, of a kind of what Afro punk originally was about. You know, you had this mix of influences with cultural influences, because also you're coming out of the whole 80s, you know, that whole 80s vibe where you had groups like X-Clan and Public Enemy and all of that, you know, all the R&B cultural influences. So all of that was fused into how people express themselves, you know, but also they played around, they had fun with it. People dressed as ninjas, you know, people dress, you know, the whole wearing doctor scrubs and all that came out of that era, you know. Ripped jeans came out of that era, but a lot of this stuff came out of the fact that a lot of the people that were into early, you know, that club era, that house era at the time were also creatives, right? You know, a lot of people don't know that this whole sort of distressed ripped jeans look came out of art schools, you know, because, you know, as an art student, as an art student, you didn't, as an art student, you didn't have a lot of money, you know. So if you were a painter, you cleaned your brushes on your jeans, you know. When they got ripped, you didn't necessarily go and replace them, you know. So that influence, which actually came out of the creative community and spilled over into the underground community, which encompassed punk, house, and all that stuff. So you had this creative playground and for people to just have fun with. So they did. They dressed as pirates, or they wore a pirate hat, or they just experimented. We had people who, all this stuff you see now with, like, logos on jeans, or painting of jeans and all of that came out of that era, right? A spillover from the graffiti influence, right? Because people were painting jeans, painting jackets, right? So that spilled over into this culture as well, because that's where you wore that stuff. That's where it was nightlife. That's where you show out, So from the garage era, it was all of that. And what you said, right, in terms of how did people dress, people knew you were going to the garage by the way you were dressed. Right? So y'all, and I remember being on the train, right? Meeting my buddies on the train and, bumping into people, oh, y'all going to the garage, right? Because you have, I'm going, you have one guy, he's dressed in doctor scrubs. The other guys went, whatever it was, just the way you were dressed. Well, even if it wasn't necessarily, it was just that style, right? Because also at the time, there were only a few, any place you were going to dressed like that was an underground club. You weren't going to any of the other established quote unquote discos like Private Eyes or something like that. Maybe you, if you, and maybe depending on who you were, you know, you could go to one of the, you might get into the mainstream clubs like that, maybe. But pretty much if you were going anywhere dressed like that, it was an underground club, you know.
How did you become a member of the Garage?
You had to, be, if I remember correctly, you had to be sponsored by a member.
Mm. Who
Uh,
sponsored you? You remember?
well, when I was in junior college, I went to Kingsborough Community out in Brooklyn, and I was part of a Black student organization. I think it was a Pan-African Students Association, right? But we had this one friend in the group named Gina, who every weekend always came back bragging about her weekends. Oh, I had this great weekend. You know, she wouldn't really give us a whole bunch of details. And eventually I said, well, you know, where's this place? Tell me about it. I want to check it out. And she's like, you can't, you know, you have to be a member. I was like, what? Member of to get in the club? Because, you know, the only membership required at other places was like, you know, dress up and have the money, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, what kind of place is this? You got to be a member. And, you know, so eventually she brought a couple of us down, you know. And when I, you know, at the time when because you had to, she didn't necessarily go every week or go this, you know, so you had to have a member bring you in if you wanted to go. So after a while I got, no, you know, I don't even think I had to be sponsored. What it was, I didn't have a member, but it did help if you knew a member. You had to tell them, like, who do you know? You know, that person didn't necessarily have to be there, but you did have to know somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, I got tired of having to ask somebody to, you know, bring me in.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found out when the membership was, you know, that's when I went down and, you know, got my membership. The first couple of times I went, it was all right, but I didn't really get it, you know.
Mm.
It took a while for me to actually get it, you know.
And what happened to Gina today? She's still in the club scene?
Um, no, unfortunately, Gina passed away some years ago from cancer, I believe.
Oh,
You know,
wow. Wow.
yeah. But she is like probably the person I knew the longest in the club scene because I knew her from junior college. Well,
Mm-hmm.
she's one of the few I know there are a couple of people that I know from junior college, but you know, you know, I'll of course always remember her for introducing me to the garage. Her nickname was her name was Gina. Her full name was Gina Dowd, but her nickname was Gina Tay because, you know, back in the day there was this sort of body wash thing that was called Gina Tay. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Jennifer. Yeah, 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 yeah.
but,
Yeah, I remember it.
yeah.
Uh,
But we always called her Tay. But
I love it. Um, what is the Loft?
the Loft, the Loft was a club that I never actually went to,
Really?
but was influenced by. I went to the Choice, right, which is what the Loft became after the original Loft closed, right?
Oh, what was
But
his choice?
the Choice was in the same area. Actually, it was the same space as the original Loft. Not well, the Loft had two spaces. The original on Prince Street, and then there was another one on Avenue C, I think. Um, but that's where after the original Loft closed, that became, you know, the next sort of generation of it. The thing about the Loft is that I never went because a lot of the lofters would go to the Loft and then they would come to the garage, right?
Mm.
When I really got into the garage, I got so hooked on the garage, I really didn't go to a lot of other clubs before the garage, like during that night. I might have party hopped a little bit. So there's some parties that I never went to. What was really pivotal for me about the Loft was that it took a while before I learned that the crowd that I was seeing in the mornings at the garage were a lot of the guys and well, a lot of the people from the Loft, because when I first started going to the garage, the crowd would change, right? When I first started going, I was used to going to just regular clubs, you know. So at a certain point in the morning, like, you know, 4 or 5, if I saw a lot of people leaving, I figured, okay, you know, party's over, right? Um, but there was one particular time when I didn't have anything to necessarily rush home to. So I said, well, I'll just stay till it closes, you know. But then about 5, 6 o'clock, this whole sort of change started to happen. And I started seeing these sort of new people come in. Some people had actually changed their clothes that came in a little like later towards like 3 or 4. They would change into these outfits, and then other people would come in, and there was all this exotic type dancing going on. I mean, like, really like innovative, all the stuff that we are talking about now was going on in the morning. And I realized later, I mean, I knew some of these guys were from this other, or affiliated with this other club called the Loft, but I still hadn't been there. But I knew these guys because they were the ones that were diving and sliding and doing all these moves on the dance floor that I was like, wow, okay, I can really I can really get into this. So a lot of the core people that I know from the garage era were lofters, like people like Loose Louie, and so many other people that you hear these names like Perry, who are all these guys from the Loft, so they were really the big influence on sort of my evolution as a dancer, so to speak, in the clubs, because these were the guys that I was vibing with on the floor early in the morning. They just stayed on through. So that's that's my little bit of knowledge on the Loft. But the whole thing with the Loft and the DJ David Mancuso, and his following was really about, was so much keyed in on his love of the music and his style of the music. He didn't really mix, from what I understand. He just played the records. But that core following was like a symbiotic, in a way, relationship with Loft and Garage.
Going back to the garage, tell folks, what do people need to know about Larry Levan?
Wow. Oh, what do they need to know about Larry Levan? One, that he was just genius in terms of what he did with music, what he did with records. Larry had you looking for records that, one, weren't out and wouldn't come out for years. Larry had you looking for records that didn't exist, in the sense that he played records and did stuff to them did stuff to it in the booth, whether his editing or in the booth where he slowed it down, sped it up. You finally got the record and it didn't sound like what you've been vibing to every week at the garage, because you thought that was the record and it wasn't. It was what Larry did to it that was the record you liked. Larry, if he didn't really know you, could be kind of standoffish, not that he was necessarily rude. You'd have to, someone has to sort of take notice of you to be rude. The other thing that they needed to know is that Larry played what he liked, and he didn't give a shit whether you liked it or not. Okay. The interesting phenomena, which I've never seen ever again, and which only existed with that garage crew, right? With that people going to the garage for that era until they closed. If Larry didn't always play stuff we liked, and we didn't always like that he played stuff we didn't like, right? Of course, you can't have a conversation with the man because he's like a million miles up in the booth. So if we didn't like it, if we weren't feeling it, we refused to dance. And we showed that refusal to dance by sitting down on the dance floor and refusing to dance until he played something we liked. And it wasn't uncommon to see at times a whole, as big as that dance floor was, a whole dance floor with people sitting down, or most of the people sitting down. And how did Larry respond to this? He didn't give a shit. That record was going to play out. And if he really liked it and felt like playing it again, he might play it again.
Wow.
We sat there until it was over. And then when he played something else, we all got up.
Wow.
So that's what I can say, that people would know about Larry.
Describe the sound system in the Paradise Garage.
Wow, that's for me. I don't know, that's kind of hard because I'm not like a music sound engineer person, but as a lay person, the bass is what I loved and what everybody loved, and I think that is, I mean, that is one of the things that really hooked me on to the garage, right? You could feel the bass in your chest bone, right? Um, the bass would make your shirt vibrate, okay? But included in that, it was, that sound system was a work of art and a thing of beauty. Um, in terms of hearing the totality of the song, of the record, of the instrumental track, um, it was just a thing of beauty. And I'll tell you what hooked me to the garage, right? Because the first couple of times it was just really a club to me. I didn't really get it. I was still wearing Bentley's outfits, right? You know, jacket, shirt, you know, slacks, you know, shoes and shit. But there was one night, and I was particularly, Larry was playing what we would call classics, right? And I remember being a little irritated because I was like, I didn't come here to hear all this old crap, you know? I didn't come here to hear this stuff from the 70s, right? And then Larry put on the Spinners, I'll Be Around. And there was something, and I've told this story to people over the years, there was something so magical, for lack of a better way to put it, about hearing that song over that sound system. I closed my eyes and just started dancing. And I got it. It was the first time that I'd actually just danced, you know, and actually did what I saw other people in the club doing that I didn't really get at the time, which is not being concerned with dancing with a partner, you know, dancing by themselves and like losing themselves. But I never, it just never sounded like the way it sounded when I heard it so full. It's so clear, so full. It was almost like I could feel it with my whole body in a way. I always tell people that's the song that hooked me into the garage, but hearing it over that sound system is what did it. You know, so that's my layman's assessment of the sound system.
Mm. Um, let's jump around a bit.
Mm-hmm.
What is Shelter?
Shelter. Shelter was the second home after the Paradise Garage ended, right? I kept, during the 90s, early 90s, I bumped into a couple of friends who would mention something about this club, the Shelter, you know. One good friend of mine, Mia Phillips, who used to be Mia McLeod, said, "Oh, you got to find your old, they're taking old memberships. You got to find your old membership and go, you know." And I knew Timmy, registered the DJ, from other parties he had thrown, you know, after the garage era. He would see me and give me a flyer, and I'd go to, you know, I'd always go to the parties. So Mia was getting married this one particular year, right? And then the whole plan was to go to this club. She said, "Come to, you know, we're gonna go to the club we're gonna go to the Shelter after our wedding reception." So I said, "Great, okay, this will be my time to go," you know. So we're at the reception, and I happened to be it was a reception party. I happened to be dancing with this young lady, and the whole time people are coming over to me going, "Oh, you're going to the Shelter later, right? You're going to the Shelter later, right?" "Yeah, yeah, I'm going," you know. And then I turn back to this young lady, and she's looking at me with this weird expression on her face. I'm like, "What?" You know, she's like, "Oh, nothing. You just don't look like you live in the Shelter." I was like, no, the Shelter, it's a club, you know, but we you know, so like, no, it's a club, you know. Just like, but to her credit, she said, "No, I was still gonna talk to you. I just didn't think you lived in a Shelter." Right? So So we go down to the shelter, you know, and again, you know, they were taking old membership. So still had my old garage membership, you know. Go into 6 Hubert Street, nice, you know, nice club. But the first thing I noticed when we go in there is that one, there's songs there's music I'm not familiar with, but other people are, right? And this is a time when Gypsy Woman was out, right? So I go in there and Larry happens to be playing Gypsy Woman, and like everybody knows this song that I've never heard, but I'm seeing these people that I knew from back in the day, and it was immediately like, you know, I think immediately though it was just like, wow, okay, I can deal with this, you know. But the space was formerly Area, you know, which I had been to that space when it was Area before. But seeing, you know, Timmy as the DJ and people I knew, it was really this sort of reboot, which was great. And it was the place where I started really shooting a lot again. I would, you know, shoot the crowd outside and people. I wasn't really into pursuing photography then. Photography had always been something I did alongside my art, you know, but I would take pictures and bring them back, you know, and people would keep telling me, you should be a photographer, you should be a photographer, these are great, you know. But that was another sort of creative environment again. Same thing with the carryovers with fashions that people were still expressing. So it was the second evolution for a lot of us.
Describe the shelter sound.
The shelter sound, it's, wow. Again, you can't say it was like the Paradise Garage because that sound system was one of a kind, you know. But a really great full sounding sound system, you know, powerful, you know, had the same strong.
What I meant more from that was the Paradise Garage, the different sound in terms of music that was there. So like, how would you describe the music that was played in Shelter versus the Garage? Because Timmy has his own unique, you know, lane.
Yeah, I think that.
How would you describe that lane? What is that lane?
Well, again, he's gone through some evolutions, you know, but during that Shelter time, I'd say it was really, wow, very it was a very soulful sort of African influenced sound in a way. You know, I mean, when I think of what he did with songs like Frontline, you know, he had to put a mix on Living on the Front Line itself. Not that it was so much different, but that sort of vibe, you know, it was a really like deep bassy, drummy, soulful vibe, you know. And in terms of the garage, the garage at that time, it was their sound was really more off the old R&B type of sound, you know, in a way, because at that point, mid to late 80s, you had the house sound, so to speak, starting to come in out of Chicago, you know. And the difference, and actually the other difference is that when you talk about then and now, it's a bit faster, right? That was one of the differences when the house.
Faster then or faster now?
No, faster now, in a sense, because when the stuff from Chicago and a lot of that sound started coming in, that was one thing that I noticed, right? It was a much more hype beat. You know, you had like a Go Bang, let's say, right? By Loose Joints, right? There's that certain pace. But then JM Silk and all these other, you know, Jack Your Body type things, you know, the pace immediately went up, you know, which was great because it spoke to a kind of level of energy that we felt at the time, you know. I mean, we liked the classics, you know, what we started calling classics to differentiate that sound. To me, that's where that whole label came from, you know, as a way to differentiate one sound that was prevalent in the garage. And then towards the mid-late 80s, this new house sort of theme started coming in. So you had that evolution kind of carry on to the Shelter era, right? Because you have artists like Monique Bingham. You have artists like Sarah Devine, you know. which are different from the Lolita Holloways, you know, of the era, right? Even though, say, some of the other, you know, in other words, like you have artists like Jocelyn Brown that also expanded into that, you know, when you think of the stuff she did with New Yorican, right? It's All Right, right? That's a clear difference in eras from Jocelyn Brown now and Jocelyn Brown during the garage,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I would look at it that way in terms of the sound difference.
What is Studio 54?
Studio 54, I went to a couple of times, not in their heyday, but more at the end of, sort of the end of the club era in general, where it was a lot easier to get into all these places. So for me, the thing that sticks out in my mind about 54 was that it was always, it was a place where people went to be seen, you know. It was the mainstream commercialized version of the scene that I was going to. You know, when you talk about Paradise Garage, clubs like the World, any place where, you know, any place where someone that we would think of as establishment, you know, would frequent. They wouldn't even know about it because they couldn't find it. There was no sign on the wall, you know. But if you wanted to be seen, if you wanted to be in the papers or on TV, you know, seen around a celebrity or something like that, or if a celebrity wanted to be seen, you know, they would be at a Studio 54, right? When they wanted to just chill, be themselves, do whatever, they would go to the Paradise Garage, you know, or a club like it. So I'm not one that hung out there a lot or was in the inner circle or even could have gotten in most of the time, you know, but I was able to go in there a couple of times.
What is Bonds International?
Bonds International was another club that I can't tell you much about because I never went.
All right,
Not
we'll move
once.
right along. What is Bentley's?
Bentley's. Oh, Bentley's is, as someone once said, a nice place to be on a Friday or Saturday night. That was the operator who I'd actually called to get the address. Right? Bentley's was the typical average, not regular place to go out if you were somewhat conservative, if you were somewhat pretty much mainstream, you weren't about anything weird, or you didn't want to be around anyone who was quote unquote counterculture, artistic, homosexual, or whatever. You went there. It was a regular club where you could go out, you know, you dressed up, you know, in your finest, you know. You might have, you know, you went out, you had some drinks, you might have boogied a little bit. You didn't really do too much getting down because you want to sweat out your nice clothes, you know. You went to, you know, possibly meet a nice gentleman or young lady or somebody, you know, same singles type thing, but very traditional, very unconventional, and where a lot of people went on the weekends in terms of going out, you know, to a dance club, because that's what most people knew about. They advertised on TV, on the radio, you know, come on down to Bentley's, and for the average person, it's a pretty nice place to go to, you know.
Where was Bentley's?
Oh gosh, where was Bentley's? It was, I can't remember exactly. In it was
Uptown,
Midtown
downtown,
somewhere.
downtown? Uptown,
Uh,
downtown, uptown?
a little bit more uptown, because you had a whole sort of series of clubs like that were like that. Bentley's, Justine's. The other thing was that it was a place that was comfortable for a lot of people because they sort of they were comfortable with that scene. Like there was a certain dance out that was popular in the mainstream. Well, if you went to Bentley's, everybody did that dance. You know, whatever it was called. You know, everybody did that dance. Dance that was popular at the time, but not as expressive, not as uninhibited. You know, sort of more reserved. You know,
Did you ever go to the club called Pulse?
Pulse. No, I
No.
didn't.
Um, what is the Winter Music Conference?
The Winter Music Conference. Winter Music Conference is an annual. Well, before, again, I have to always say before lockdown, before a couple of years ago. It's an annual conference. Well, it's an annual event for people who are part of the independent house music, electronic music industry, as well as people who enjoy that music. So it's a combination of industry related workshops and seminars for people who are DJs, producers, promoters, who want to come together with, with other professionals, other people in their industry, and exchange info, learn. There are awards that are given out in various music categories, and there are also a ton of parties that take place that weekend. It's been going, I guess, or it had been going for at least 20 years. I didn't get to go until 2005, but it's about a week. It's about a week of again, seminars, events, parties, which people from not only all over the country come from, but different parts of the world. Again, when it was at its height.
Mm-hmm. Switch gears. What happened to New York nightlife?
What happened to New York
before COVID? Before COVID.
Before COVID. What happened to New York nightlife before COVID? Partly gentrification, and a lack of. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say gentrification and part of it, and a lack of venues that didn't necessarily have to do directly with gentrification, right? So during the garage era, you had political elements that wanted to shut clubs like that down. And after a horrendous fire called the Happy Land fire, that allowed New York, city government to sort of crack down on a lot of independent underground sort of venues. So a couple of things happened. Commercial spaces, because that's one reason we lost the garage, right? Huge commercial spaces that a lot of venues were using as dance clubs. Basically, they were lost to higher commercial businesses who could afford to pay a lot more for some of these spaces. You saw that happen with what is now the NYU dorms in Union Square, which was previously housed the Palladium, an old theater which became a dance club, right? So when you had the 90s with the Reagan era setting in and other economic considerations, the original owners of some of these places, when their leases were up, they found themselves without a space, which is what happened to the garage. When the garage's lease was up, the owners, realized they could get a lot more money by renting it to AT&T, which they did, right? Because these places can afford to pay a lot more money. So that's one thing that happened. In conjunction, you had eventually what happens, the only places that were left, or the most spaces that were left, were places that were never really meant to be dance clubs to begin with, such as, lounges, bar lounges, right? And these places always had a problem operating because of the New York licensing situation. If you might have a bar that has a lounge area and even enough area to dance, but they're not licensed for dancing, right? So they couldn't function in that regard. For other people who operated bars, the difference with using some of these places, why it became more expensive for a lot of people to now throw parties and for New York nightlife to continue, was that for spaces that own bars, for them, if there were people in their establishment, they expected them to be drinking, because that's their business and that's how they operate. Sure, people might have a little twirl or a two-step, but they're buying drinks all night. The dance crowd it's not that they never bought drinks but they don't spend the money in the volume that some of these places do. So a lot of establishments, even if they had a bar, or because of the economics, they find that their business now depends more on a bar, right? They are charging now, they started charging bar guarantees, which made it it made it a lot more difficult for independent producers to have parties, to do nightlife. When you combine that with the lack of commercial spaces big enough to operate a dance club and make a profit every week, or every weekend, which became a hell of a lot more difficult over the years, because of the amount of money that, because of just so many different economic factors. But that's led to, the sort of desolation that of New York nightlife that we had even before COVID. It got down to where people couldn't successfully operate that sort of business week to week. You know, Everybody can't go everywhere. So not that you necessarily had so much of an overcrowding, but you have eventually a smaller market uh, for that crowd that is going out to these types of venues for this type of music. When you have, other competition, and you have, uh, bottle service and all that sort of thing, which is how these people made money in the spaces. It's what happened to the Club Shelter on Varick Street. It became a high-end club that, operated on these crazy prices, but these were the folks who could afford to operate the space, pay the rents, the monthly rent, pay the utilities and all that. Because if you're not getting that income from a certain amount of crowd week to week, it's hard to sustain. So you have people doing monthly parties, and things like that. But a lot of it has to do with the economics and the politics around New York City nightlife that wasn't friendly to establishments that were whose patrons were largely Black, Latino, people of color. To raise that. But that's my take on it anyway.
Speaking of which, general question:
Mhm.
house music more or less inclusive than back in the day? And then explain.
Um, it is just as inclusive to me as it was back in the day. I don't feel it's less inclusive, and I don't feel it's more inclusive. I think it's always been inclusive. You know, I mean, from back when I started going to the garage, it was always understood. And to me, it's an interesting thing when you say that, because it's almost like, is New York less inclusive or more inclusive, right? Um, to me, it speaks to, and it relates to the question you asked me about, house music, in a sense that, to me, um, New York has always been about being who you want to be, doing what you want to do. I mean, within reason, right? But regardless of who you are, you're supposed to be able to be that here, right? Gay, straight, whatever. You want to walk around in a towel, yeah, we're gonna think you're crazy, but go on ahead with it, right? You get on the subway, you make your crazy ass speech. You get to say, nobody's gonna shout you down, really, unless you're talking about killing puppies. But you get to make your crazy ass speech, your religious pitch, whatever. It's New York, right? Just don't touch anybody, right? So with house music, to me, that's the way I look at it. House music is just as inclusive for anybody who wants to. And as a matter of fact, again, think about, I'll say before lockdown, there were parties that were being thrown in Jersey uh, on Exchange Place, which is right across from the city, but it's like a pier area. I don't know if you've ever been there. But to see, and it's really so great and so amazing to see this outdoor house music event going on, right? And there are Chinese people, like Chinese speaking Chinese people that are attracted to the vibe and the music and come over, right? East India, people from wherever they are that are around, whether it's Fort Greene or whatever, I have always seen these folks welcomed, encouraged to dance with everybody, right? You see people at these events, you know, people are welcome. They're included. It's about the music. It's about the love. It's like in a lot of ways in that house people, in their ideal, house people become ambassadors. Like, they will invite people to come in and dance. Come check this out. Listen to this. This is Larry Levan. This is Justin Brown. It's cool, right? And they, yeah, and they're here. They'll dance with they'll dance, they'll invite them to stay and just enjoy the vibe, just the same way it was when I first started going to the garage. To me, it's no different. Not that not that everybody everywhere at any time was ever always nice. You know what I'm saying? But that is what the scene still is. It's still welcoming. It's still inclusive. I mean, you know, there aren't any new kind of alternative folks that have propped up in the last 50 years. So everybody's still there, you know.
What are the short and long potential long-term effects COVID will have on the nightlife scene?
Potential long-term effects?
Short and long-term effects.
Wow. Short-term effects, nobody's dancing. Nobody's dancing with each other. Nobody's dancing the way they used to. Nobody gets to see each other. Nobody gets to hug each other. You know, the people that you only saw at these events, you know, the people whose names I only know their nicknames, or I never actually found out their names. You know, the artists, the performers, the DJs who aren't practicing their craft, who aren't performing with a crowd, myself who is not working because, you know, there are no parties to shoot, there are no events going on. That's like the short term, the spiritual, emotional, and financial downsides of the COVID lockdown. You know, that's what I myself and a lot of people are feeling, I'm sure. Long-term effects are, you know, are kind of mysterious, and who knows? Those pictures I showed you with, you know, the people on the dance floor, it might be 5 years before that happens again. You know, that's the long term. The long term also is what it's going to do to various industries, right? You already see with DJ streaming stuff online, like, you know, are people going to be willing to pay for streams? You know, of certain folks for over the, you know, that they will be listening to in their living room. So how do you perform? You know, how do you perform? How do you DJ, right? How do you generate content? How do you generate media content, right? For the people who are doing video vlogs or blogs or networks, you know, um, there's that sort of, again, the financial aspects of it, the creative aspects of it, the emotional aspects of it. You know, what becomes your social life that used to be based on a certain type of interaction, right? um, what is the effects of, you know, a significant amount of time where people don't know what it's like to have that interaction on the dance floor, to be in that environment where you feel comfortable and just sit and talk with somebody you never met before, you know, about your common interest. You know, how do you network? How do you make connections to people? How do you meet those people that you would never have met if you weren't in the room? You know, all of that stuff. The full spectrum. You know, it's two things with the long-term effects, right? It's the unknown and the unknowable, right? So the unknown is some of those short-term effects and some of the sort of nuts and bolts things. You know, the unknowable is sort of that long vision of what happens to our so-called house community, right? How do you pass that on? With a lot of people from the garage era, right, being of a certain age, and it's not about people passing away. It's simply about how do you pass that on, right? Sure, you can send somebody mixes and all that, but you know, you end up trying to tell somebody what it was like and how it used to be and not knowing if you'll have something to say. This is how it used to be. You take it and you do something with it. You know, there's going to be a gap with that because they're not that they can't comprehend it, but there are certain things that can't be done. So is it going to be an evolution that's never going to go back to anything that we knew? Is it going to be based on a whole digital thing? You know, 10 years from now, you know, folks will be doing the retro thing and having an actual physical party. right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to having holograms in their living room,
Mm-hmm.
or doing it remotely. Like, we don't know, where that's going to end up. But it's again, it's the thing that you can't sort of see where it's going. I made a joke when we first went under lockdown, right? I was joking with a friend of mine saying, there's going to come a time where we go, man, I was at this party the other night. It was crowded as hell. There were like 10 people there,
Ah,
you know?
yeah.
But now, I mean, the other thing about when we were looking at the images that I have this sort of dichotomy thing going on, because I look at these images, right? And I say, wow, I so much miss being on a crowded dance floor, right? But that's one half of my mind now. The other half of my mind is looking at that picture and being scared to death, going, they're all gonna die. you know,
Mm-hmm.
like, and you think about, and it goes back to how you said it's gonna affect in the short term, right? Think about now posting pictures of a party, right? Say you do a party and you post pictures of the party. What goes to, now you have to think about, what pictures do I post? I shouldn't post the one with the two people standing next to each other without masks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the one with one person wearing a mask and the other person isn't so bad, but maybe I'm sending the wrong message, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, you start thinking about those things, because now, if you are going forward the next couple of, say the next year, right?
Yep.
That's going to be a factor, right? Because it used to be, when somebody told you about a party, you think, all right, well, who's going to be there? Who's the DJ? Who's going to be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're wondering about, like, how many people are going to be there?
Right.
Like, what's the spacing like?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it indoors? Where is it? Is there ventilation inside? Is the air going to be? You think about all this stuff. So, short term and long term, you have to think about all these things now. And I was thinking to myself the other day, people must have went through similar things during the 1918 pandemic, right? Because we're at a time now where we're doing all the same things they stopped doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were wearing masks, they weren't congregating, but at some point, again, it was a while, it was a few years after that, but people eventually got back to that. Now we're looking at it, from a historical standpoint. But that was a good, from 1918 to, that was a good 3 or so years that people were still dealing with the after effects of that.
It was a while.
Yeah. So it's something you think about all the time, but it's such a mystery now, because, I mean, just with the way things are, you just don't know.
Let's pivot to photography. A few rapid fire questions.
Mhm.
Um, we talked about how you got the name Photo Soul. Uh, you don't post photos on the internet because?
Well, no, I post pictures on the internet all the time. But when I do, one, I don't feel the need to post tons, because I don't think anybody's all that interested in seeing, 3,000 pictures of whatever party I was at. I'm selective in what I post, and I'm careful because, a long time ago, as it was said, yeah, I forget where I read it, but once you put something up on the internet, it's up for grabs. You know, I make sure that I watermark my images, and I make sure that they're low res images, because I don't want them stolen and appropriated for use that I don't know about. And these days, there's so much. I mean, you're talking about the world, so if somebody steals your picture and publishes it in Singapore and makes money off it, you don't know. You know, you won't know if they do it. And I don't believe in going off on rants about, this person used my work and they didn't, all this kind of stuff. That's the reason I watermark and put low res stuff online, so I don't have to deal with that. But I also don't want my work stolen,
You talked about starting shooting dance. Was this ballet or when you started
Um,
photography?
excuse me. No, the way it worked out was that I had always, when I went to art school, I went to School of Visual Arts. I was an illustration major, fine arts major, media major. Every media major is required to take a photography class. I mean, since I was small, I always liked photography anyway, right? But during the early 90s, I was working for a publicity a PR publicity firm that handled modern dance companies. So, that was my first, that's why I got to see a lot of modern dance, whatever. The boss I was working for at the time, excuse me, was somewhat, I don't know, high strung or something. But anyway, she was talking to me about having problems using her Instamatic camera at the time. And I happened to have some pictures that I had used. The first camera I ever bought was a used camera. It was a rangefinder, right? Totally manual. You had to guess everything. So I had a couple of pictures on me. And I said, oh, well, I take some pictures every once in a while. These are a couple that I took. I didn't really think anything of them. They were not important at all. And she made a big deal out of it. Oh, these are nice. I like these, blah, blah, blah. And they were just pictures of like a friend walking down the street, Excuse me. So one day, and she dealt with freelancers who would shoot these shows at the theaters and whatnot and give them pictures. So one day she says to me, we're going down to shoot a dress rehearsal. We're going down to a dress rehearsal at the Joyce Theater. It's a Garth Fagan dance company. Garth Fagan was a choreographer who did The Lion King, right? So this was like in the early 90s, before all that. So she says, why don't you come down with me, bring your camera, maybe you'll get something we can use, I just wanted to get out of the office, really. I wasn't thinking about a photographer or anything. So we go down there. I'm snapping a couple of pictures here and there. So we're leaving now. We're going back to the office, right? And she goes, hey, and mind you, this woman had only seen like 2 pictures that I had done, right? And as we're going back, I think we're going to the subway or something. And she goes, they're having a cocktail party for the dance company tonight, and I got them to hire you to shoot it. Yeah, I did that. I was like, what are you doing? You can't do that. I'm not a photographer. Why, it was, I was like freaked out. What are you doing? And this was like in 1990s, right? And she goes, well, they're going to pay you $300. So I said, all right. I literally said, all right, I'll take the money. But if they don't like these pictures, this is your fault, And that was actually my first real paying photography job, which I did. It was sort of behind the scenes covering the party, which they liked, which I said, well, thank God, I have to go through this shit again. It did get me kind of thinking, hey, maybe I can do this. But what happened from that was that because she dealt with all these different dance companies, and because some of them were like a little eccentric, there was Merce Cunningham, that was the next thing I did, or Paul Taylor. But basically they said they want somebody to take a picture of them teaching this class, but Merce doesn't like people. He doesn't like outside people, but he knows you. So, we'll have you go down and do it. And it was through an editor at Dance Magazine at the time. And that's literally how I got into shooting dance, and I would just, anytime we were going down to do something, it's not like I still had my job as assistant. My job was still assistant office manager, but I could basically, I could bring my camera and shoot anything I wanted, So I shot performances. I shot Bill T. Jones. I shot every major modern dance company that appeared in New York. I shot Bill T. Jones's rehearsal for a very famous, well-known work called Last Night on Earth. And a lot of this stuff hasn't been seen by anybody. I shot Merce Cunningham, Paul Taylor, all the modern dance companies, most of them that you've heard of. So from then, it was also at the same time I was working for this PR company that I was going to the shelter, because this was early 90s. So, I started shooting more. So I started saying, hey, I can get into my, my thing, so that's where it came from.
Talk to us about the transition to shooting fashion.
Shooting fashion. Well, in the days of MySpace, right? I connected with this publication called Caribbean Posh Magazine, right? Which at the time I didn't know was the creation of someone I knew from Shelter, right? Which is Jeanette Bryn. She now lives out in the Virgin Islands. But we had originally started, talking about me doing some photo stuff with house, because she said, yeah, I kind of want to sort of do something with the house music thing, and she calls me up one day and she says, calls me up and messages me and says, hey, do you want to shoot Fashion Week? Now I had shot Fashion Week some years ago, just one show I did it was through my PR company that I worked for. They got us into a show that Absolute was doing during Fashion Week. I wasn't there in an official capacity. I just got to go, but I did bring my camera, which I started doing. So just, do you want to shoot Fashion Week? And I thought, I don't know why not? I was like, well, if you can get me in, sure, I'll shoot it. I've never done that. Why not? So that's how I got into shooting Fashion Week. And it was, I didn't have a really great camera at the time. I think I had a Sony. It wasn't an SLR, but it was, it's cool. So I got to Fashion Week, and I had this whole strategy in my mind, because I said, I would like to kind of get it. I'd always been interested in doing fashion, So I said, I'd kind of like to figure out some kind of way to keep this going. I had no idea how I would do that. I was just a small little no-name publication. So my only thought was that, I got to meet as many people as I can. Got to be really nice, and I have to make sure they remember me, right? The transition was of course a lot different, because you're dealing with this whole other you're dealing with like 600 photographers in one place. You're new to the scene. Everybody's got what I called a real camera. They've got all this gear and everything, and you don't know people, you don't know the ropes. But shooting fashion, again, was different than shooting in a club, or shooting, pictures of your friends. And it was this whole different language that you have to learn about movement, lighting, pacing, and all of that. And it really made me up my game in a sense, from being around real professional photographers. I call them real professional photographers at the time, but people who are doing high quality work, right? And shooting by certain criteria, certain standards, which I didn't know about because I wasn't in that atmosphere, And so seeing their work, looking at my own work, that was that made me sort of conscious of the areas I need to grow. And that's really important, recognizing areas that you want to grow in, areas where you need to grow in. And when you're shooting, to be working on those things. It goes back to something else that you might have asked me about before, in terms of, how I shoot in the club environment. The other thing that I do especially in the club environment, it gives me, and the fashion environment, gives me a chance to work on certain things, right? So if you're in a club environment, if you want to work on learning how to capture movement, that's the perfect place. Shooting dancers, you can work on that. If you want to learn about working up with a certain kind of lighting, you can do that. I've always decided to I've always been conscious of that, right? So that people say, and same thing with fashion. You've always heard about things that you're not supposed to do with photography, right? Always shoot with the sun, over your shoulder or something like that, which are valid. But at certain times, there's things that I want to do that are against the rules. And if I never do them, I won't learn how to do them, right? So, people that don't shoot a woman at this angle ever, well, I believe I can get a decent shot off, if I practice it enough, that these rules aren't always absolute, but being involved in fashion and having to change, right, the way I shoot certain things gave me that understanding, gave me that sort of level of growth. Yeah, I mean, fashion's a just different world in some sense.
Two-part question. What advice would you give to the next generation of clubbers? And what advice would you give to the next generation of photographers after you?
After the next generation of clubbers, be open, be open musically, to something different, to change, to evolution, socially, be open. The magic club, you know, for me, the whole club thing and the music thing, it's about being open to people, you know, being willing to get to know people, being willing to let your guard down, being willing to, as the cliche goes, dance as if no one is watching, you know, being willing to let yourself go, be free to embrace the music in the ways that it touches you, you know, let it. People also used to say, and it's a true thing that happens to people when they in house, and I'll say specifically with house genre, right? It changes you, and you gotta let it change you, right? It feels unfamiliar. You're not sure about liking this kind of music or dressing this kind of way or having this vibe. You got to go with it because that's your evolution talking. You know, in terms of photographers, what I would say to the next generation of photographers is know your craft. You know, work on your craft, work on being, you know, the best you can be, constantly evolving, you know, as a photographer, and being being willing to do the work. You know, you also have to, and being willing to do the work means educating yourself, right? People, you know, I'll hear somebody say, well, you know, I want to be a photographer because, you know, I think I have an eye, or because I have an eye, you know. One, I found very few photographers that actually use that phrase that I know that I've worked with. You know, they don't talk about having an eye, you know. Not that it's not necessarily a real thing, but when I hear somebody say that, I want to ask them, one, uh, who told you you have an eye? And two, how'd you get it? Right? Um, because you can't simply just have an eye, you know. You have to learn to see. So I talk about something that is a riff from a phrase I got from Marshall Jefferson, right? Marshall Jefferson, I once, when I interviewed him once, he talked about musical literacy, right? So I also think in terms of visual literacy, right? You have to educate your eyes, right? Um, Whichever way, you know, you find best to do that. But there's a certain, you have to learn some things. You have to know some things. You can't, it's not enough to simply go out and buy a camera. You go out and buy a camera and you read the book, you'll know how to use the camera, right? If you think of it, if you can learn to drive, you can be a damn good driver, but that doesn't make you an IndyCar racer, okay? And you are not going to learn that on your own. You can't, you know, you cannot, you can teach yourself the basics, but at some point you're going to have to drive that kind of car. You know, you're going to have to talk to somebody who's been in a race. You have to do something. Shooting, you know, so using, you know, being aware of that, being willing to put in the work as a photographer. You know, yeah, that, you know, yeah, there's all this other kind of stuff that you can go into, but when I think of, like, for myself, like what's most important, you know, it's been constantly working on my craft. You know, when I first got really interested in pursuing photography, I was working as a studio assistant, excuse me, for a photographer, and really it meant just sleeving slides, putting slides in the sleeves, and in some cases actually physically creating the slide from the negative. But when I first got interested, I asked him, I said, I'm interested in really getting into photography. What classes should I take? And he said, you know, he's this old white guy, you know, grizzled, sort of, you know, ex-hippie looking dude. He says, you want to be a photographer? Go out and take some pictures. Does you want to take classes? Take business, take marketing, you know? Now, he was correct for a basic step, you know. It doesn't, you don't necessarily have to take classes, but you do have to get with somebody who knows the craft, who's able to teach you certain things, because there are a lot of things in photography that it took me a while to learn, because I had to learn them based on my previous knowledge as a painter. Like, I couldn't explain some things technically to you, but I know what I want the light to do because I have that experience, right? So there was something else I wanted to add about that. It slipped my mind now, but basically that's what I would that's what I would say. Like, um, have a have a large visual palette, let's say. Don't be so concerned about gear, about buying. You know, you can start off with a cell phone if that's all you have, right? Whatever it is you have, if you only have an SLR with the kit lens it came with and you can't afford another lens, learn to use that. Learn to use it thoroughly. Learn to make it do what you need it to do, right? As much as possible. So, you may not have a certain kind of lens, work with the equipment you got. Because when you step up, when you're able to get what you want, you'll be able to use that equipment so much better. You'll have such a better understanding, of it. It's not about how much your equipment costs. It's about what you do with it. We're looking at, we can go to museums and look at photographs made by photographers who used wooden cameras, right? And the kicker with that is, with my DSLR, I can't do what they did. I haven't reached that skill level yet, right? So it's really about your love for the craft, right? It's about your love for the craft. If you want to do it, be in it for the long haul. It may take a while. Things may happen in a heartbeat, but you know what? It may take 5 years or whatever.
Mm.
You have to figure out what you want to do with this technology, and it's going to be changing, right? Right? It's going to be advancing. You have to keep in mind that it's the hardware part of it, the computer. It's just a tool. Even when they get the most sophisticated AI, it's still not going to replace a human being in terms of how we do things, right? So it's really the substance. Now, equipment and great equipment to work with is important, and get it whenever you can get it, but the core has got to be your, whatever it is you want to do with it, whether it's a sports photography, whether it's creative fine arts, but it's really going to be about what you bring to the craft. So,
Well said. Well said. Those are the questions that I had. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
um, I I mean, there are, in terms of just from a photography standpoint, or
From photography or music?
um, well, I think that well, I would say that when it comes to one of the things when it comes to shooting and photographing music, and especially the house music scene or music in general, you have to also really be aware of the relationship. And again, the relationship between yourself and the industry that you're working in, and also the subject matter, right? And the style, your method of working. If you go to a performance, right, that may be your one time to see that performer, right? So you have to learn, you have to pay attention to learn that performer or that DJ, right? And keep in mind what you want to capture. They move a certain way. Uh, there's a particular angle of movement that's more flattering to them. You need to keep that in mind, right? So that your final reflection is something that you like, and that potential person likes, right? It also, if you are able, in which in house music you do sometimes get the chance to see, a Monique Bingham more than once, a Barbara Tucker more than once. Use those opportunities to learn the subject, right? Performers a lot of times have a similar performing style. Remember that angle, that looked so great, right? When Barbara Tucker, flips her head to the side and you got that great shot. She does that when she performs. Look out for that, right? Look out for the angles, for the lighting, all that is most conducive to your subject, so that you don't post pictures that are unflattering, even though you think you like, right? Because I've talked to performers and said, God, those pictures are freaking awful of me. I don't want that posted. But to that person, it looks good, right? Another indication that you don't have the eye that you think you have. A lot of time I say, this person told me they had an eye. If they had an eye, they wouldn't have posted that. Learn to consider your subject. Men have different considerations than women, right? Learn to think about how a woman is going to want herself reflected, especially while she's performing, right? You think it's so great that she was so expressive getting that note out, but that's an ugly face that she doesn't necessarily want seen, right? The angle that you shot her at, what she was doing with her body, she may not think is that flattering, right? Err on the side of caution, right? Think about how you would want, you have pictures that people say, oh, you look great. And you're like, God, I hate that picture. You know, we all have those considerations. So that's part of your whole visual literacy, learning to have those considerations and all this stuff. After a while, you'll get used to it going on all at once, but there'll come a time when you get comfortable with that, because you will have a way of working based on knowing your style, knowing what you do, what you like to do. And all of that, what you do, what you like to do, how you do it, is what you're bringing to it. If you're doing the same thing as everybody else, they don't need you. You won't stand out. Nobody will know you, right? If they see your work and you have those things together, they'll know it's your work, because they'll see that that's your thing. He plays with shadows, that's his thing. I always know, and you've gotten to the point where you can do it well, in terms of the music too. It helps if you can appreciate the music, all of that helps you capture the vibe of the moment. You'll find yourself influenced by the whole atmosphere. If you get to the point where you can appreciate it all, and have a running thing in your mind, the more you do it, the more you'll become acclimated to it. But because it all ties together, the music, right? The music, the people, what you want to capture, how you capture it. That's what gets me excited. That's what makes shooting in an environment like a club fun and exciting, as opposed to a chore. Just that, well, somebody's paying me to do this, and here I am. Because there are people who shoot fashion that really, they're not into fashion. It's a job. They're not necessarily fashion photographers, but they cover fashion. My editor wants this show, so that's the reason I'm doing it. I'm there because I like it. You see me there, I'm a fashion photographer. So I'm gonna iron my freaking shirt at least. So, and it's the same thing. There's a certain awareness that you just have to be aware of and have when you bring it to your work, regardless. So that's kind of what I can think to add.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I will keep you posted. I've got 11 interviews in the chamber.
No,
I'm gonna start. It's gonna be a while, at least 60 days or so before I post it. But
that's all right. I'm not one to be in a hurry to see myself on screen or talking. I don't know. I know I'll feel awkward when I see it, or I'll think, maybe I didn't come off all that great or something.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you for this. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy your day, and
man. All right, my man.
All right, man. Have a good day. Take care.
Yeah, thanks again, brother.
All right, take care. Peace.